different rainfall levels fall in different areas. And it's actually quite important to, first of all, look at your resource before developing your sustainable energy options, because that's actually really critical towards actually making a sustainable development. Thank you.
Professor, may I make a comment as well? If I switch from rapporteur to questionnaire. And I think the central issue, of course, there's enormous short-termism, and you worked in financial markets, which are notoriously short-termism, and this partly created the global financial crisis. Now, to what extent do you think that regulation can help to address this problem? You talked about consumer initiatives or, investing sustainably. People may do so. Yes, they would like to do so. But to what extent is regulation a factor here? What's your opinion on that?
I think without additional regulation and policy making, this will not work. This will not work. And you have heard at the beginning that Professor Gemawat said, I'm the former managing director. I moved out of financial markets because I want to move into policy making.
You thought of the long term, yes.
I'm trying to, yeah.
Today, the food and agriculture composition of the world's GDP is around 4%. 32% is the manufacturing sector. The balance 64%. How do we increase the food and agriculture production beyond reach at least 20 to 25%? In the long term, it's going to harm us. This disproportionate distortion is going to risk us. This is a long-term requirement of the world at large, not alone in some places. The world at large, the GDP is around only 4%, and it is coming down. 1 year back, it was around 4%. It has come down by another 0.25% or 0.5%. It has reached to 3.5%, I believe. But this is going to pose a great risk in the years to come, because there is a greater shift of rural people to urban lands, instead of providing sufficient infrastructure of township in rural areas. See, we need a upliftment in lifestyles, betterment. But in the process of shifting, the large slums getting developed in cities, and food and agriculture shortage is likely to cause a severe problem in the long-term perspective. This is my opinion.
Question relevant in the context of what's happening with cereal prices. Once again, Alexander, would you like to?
I think this is just one further example of the constraints that we face. Some of you will have followed, for instance, the current mergers and acquisitions discussions on potash, a large provider of fertilizer. I think this is just one further signal how resources will become increasingly important. Fertilizer is one of them, water is second, energy. All that also plays into food production, absolutely.
Okay, if there are no additional questions at this juncture, let me turn to our second set of speakers who are going to be taking more of a cross-cutting perspective across these different issues. And we're going to start with Senator Malahou Forte.
My fellow global citizens, I ask for your indulgence before I begin my presentation just to acknowledge the work of the ITC, and in particular to acknowledge this work under the leadership of Ms. Pat Francis. You'll understand we're daughters of Jamaica, and that means a lot. In this session, we're looking ahead and planning for tomorrow. And we're doing so from a place of recession and recent signs of recovery. The World Economic Outlook reports that global recovery is underway, and indeed it is proceeding better than expected. But there are downside risks to sustained economic growth. and this will leave fragile recoveries vulnerable to potential new shocks. I'd like to speak a little about the future of world trade. I'll look at the elements that will shape world trade, the current trends in international trade and new global market economies, strategies to be pursued, and if time permits, the role of aid for trade. And I just tell you a little about what is happening in my own country, Jamaica, particularly in the area of ICT. Now, what is the future of world trade in this context? I think we can expect an expansion in international trade for both goods and services. We'll also see a proliferation of regional trade agreements, but capacity constraints must be noted. We're also seeing growth in offshoring services. In fact, the 2009 Information Economy Report has indicated that the offshoring of front office services, consumer contact services, back office services, and knowledge processing grew rapidly over the past decade, and more companies in a growing number of industries and countries are taking advantage of the productive efficiencies in outsourcing these and other activities. The future reflected here requires strong information and communication technology, institutional and physical infrastructure, and an adjustment to business models in developing countries in order to adapt to such an environment. Question is, what are the elements that will shape such a future? I'd like to suggest that economic growth is being driven by ICT, which encompasses the emergence of new products and economic activities. We're looking at intensification of globalization, which is driven by the advancement in information and communication technologies and enhancement in the transportation linkages between states due to the global. So we're seeing increase in mobile and other telephonic subscriptions. We're seeing increases in broadband internet subscription and penetration, increases in the usage of courier services, increases in access to cable television, and increases in inter-country and interregional travel, in spite of the statistic put forward by the professor. The desire of countries to protect the intellectual property rights and investment of their nationals outside national borders. So these are the elements that are shaping the future. Now, what are the current trends in international trade, and what new global market opportunities are being or will be available? We're seeing the emergence of new economic powers, together with a reduction in the margin of preference in traditional markets. And that is leading to a change in direction of trade, and developing countries will have to position themselves to take advantage of these emerging markets. There is also the cyclical nature of pricing and the vulnerability of commodities trade. That is requiring developing countries to place additional focus on value-added exports. Now, the effect of the global financial and economic crisis has severely impacted revenue flows and the export performance of developing countries, forcing governments like my own to redirect resources that would otherwise have gone into trade-enabling projects and programs. Ladies and gentlemen, the crisis has also exacerbated the balance of payments, the indebtedness of highly indebted middle-income countries as governments experience revenue shortfall. The pervasive nature of the new techno-driven market has brought about new challenges to the resilience of small and medium enterprises, the SMEs, which are unable to procure the required ICT to compete in the regional and global market. Cooperation with the development partners is therefore critical. We're also seeing the application of voluntary standards evolving, and this is doing so as new barriers for export originating in developing countries. So the next question that has to be asked and answered deals with a strategy. What strategies can developing countries